All right, good afternoon, special educators. I know that you do not want to be here at another PD day, but today, hopefully, I'm going to enlighten you about, guess what? Laws, special education laws. And I know you're sitting there going, oh, why? But we need to know where we came from. So today we're going to review these laws, special education laws. Perkins Act, 1984, the 504 Plan, Public Law 94, 142. IDEA, which also stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Perkins Vocational Rehabilitation Act. So we need to start off with what is a law. And you're like, oh, why do we have to know law? Well, back to when I originally took my first admin class, one of the classes we had to take was on laws. And back then I thought, why in the world do we have to take a law class? But actually it was an interesting class. After I took it, I got to read a lot of different case studies. And then when I got my EDS, we also had a law class to take too, and we got to study more case studies. And actually, by the time I'm studying now for the next go round, you realize how everything ties in each other, which comes from law. So a law is passed by the government. It helps to create rules and order. Helps with the function in society. If we don't have laws, we don't have any structure. And the last one is penalties will be followed if the law is not followed or broken. So I know you're asking her, why are we sitting here? Why are you making me come to another PD day? I've had enough PD days. Well, we're having this at the beginning of the school year so that we can go over the laws and you can understand a little bit more. Big one is knowledge is power. It's good just to know a little bit. You don't need to be a lawyer to sit here in this class today, but just to know enough to why should I know enough about the law. To be informed is the big thing. That way you're talking to a colleague, you might be talking to a parent, you might be talking to your coordinator, you might be talking to your principal or director, but you know a little about the law. It's good to know the reason why we're here as educators. We all want to teach, or else we would not be here, and we want to work with students because that's our main priority. And so we need to know how the laws interact with what we're doing, and also what got us here as educators. And it all started from somewhere. So we're going to start off with the Perkins Act of 1984. The original act became law just before World War I. So that's how long ago back it became. This is why we are starting with this one first. And it went into effect on September 26, 1973. So the law was really formed, the act, back around World War I, but then it was passed in 73. The tenets of the law: this opened the door for people with disabilities to enter the workforce. It also prohibited discrimination, and it also gave equal opportunity to apply for positions with the federal government and contractors. So this law helped people with disabilities become able to work in the workforce, which they didn't have that opportunity before. I've got a friend who worked for the IRS back in high school, and at the end of high school he started, his vision wasn't the best anymore. And I ran into him a couple years ago at a family situation, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said, oh, I work for the IRS now. But technically he was legally blind, but he could still see you. And I said, oh, what are you doing for the IRS? And he was like a data collector. So if it wasn't for this law, he would have a hard time getting a job just in the private sector, but the government was able to help him out get a job with this law. The strengths of this law, it's like an IEP, accommodations which are involved in an IEP, and the employer can't ask you a lot of questions about your disability. That's a big one. Quick points of the law: was amended a couple times, 1993, 1998, and 2015. And this had to do with changes in the funding. Now, since the government funds it, a person has a hard time finding the money trail. There's so many different loopholes, we don't really know where all the money comes from, but somehow it's there for a law. And it helps people get opportunities to move up in the workforce, and we need it to provide, it also helps people with personal assistance to do their job. So if you're like him, he does kind of walk with a cane at times. My friend who works for the IRS, and if he needs an assistant or something to help him out with his job, that's what that is. Our next law we're going to talk about is 504 plans. And I'm sure you've heard of this in your job because we do IEPs and we do 504 plans. We don't do a lot of them, but this is our second one. The law was enacted on September 26, 1973, and this became a law under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. But see how you can see how laws start coming about. Back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Fair Housing Act of 1968, and Title IX of the Education Amendments. These are the foundation that brought up for this law to come about. This law helped veterans coming home from Vietnam under the Rehabilitation Act because they were having a difficult time trying to get jobs and they had disabilities and so forth. 4 key words of this law, and this is almost any law: thou shalt not discriminate. So these were our veterans coming home, and we could not just put them out on the streets. We're here to help them. So the 504 is to provide fair and equitable education for people. It's a much smaller version of an IEP. It's sometimes 1 to 2 pages, could be 3, but it's not as long as a 25 to 30 page IEP. Strengths of this law: accommodations for disabled persons, removes barriers, and the individual can keep on learning. What it protects: students' rights. It also not to be excluded from participating in activities with the 504. What do you need to watch out for the 504? Because it's not a big document. Possibilities with the plan, passive about the plan. We just don't want to put a student aside and say, oh, they have a 504, they don't have an IEP. They still have the same rights. We don't want to accept the school's standard of what they feel a 504 plan is. The school needs to implement the plan along with the team, and the plan should be reviewed yearly. So we've learned our 2 laws here. There's no amendments that have been done to this law. It covers elementary and secondary levels, and it's up to the student to advocate for themselves when they go to college for any adjustments that they might need or accommodations with the 504. All right, I know you're tired already of sitting here and going, this is boring. Mr. Walt, why do we have to learn this? Because we need to know where we're coming from. So I've got a 5 questionnaire I'm going to pass out. Top 3 people who answer correctly will get 30 minutes of free plan time by me at some point this school year. So once, actually the paper is on your table, flip it over. First 3 people that bring it up to me, you will get 30 minutes free plan time at some point this year. So take your time. When we come back, we're going to go on and continue our laws. Hopefully everybody did well. Here we go. Let's continue. Public Law 94-142. This was enacted on November 29th, 1975. This is Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It was under that. The 4 tenets of this law: accommodations, modifications, and related services. Have an IEP. With this law, it's like a roadmap. That's what an IEP is, and we discussed that before. And it helps out with the least restrictive environment. And the big one is due process for families, so that they are getting all the rights, accommodations, and met for their child. The strengths of law: schools needed to provide accommodations and modifications. So with this law, the student will be able to be in class and have access to the same material that the Gen Ed staff has, Gen Ed students. Tenets continued. Law was renamed and amended in 1990 to IDEA Law, which will be the next one we'll be talking about. And this is hard to believe, this fact: in 22 to 23 school years, 66% of school-age children were in the classroom 80% or more of the day. So when I was growing up, across the street was a girl back in the 70s, and she used to be picked up by the special ed bus, and it actually said it on there at the time, and she had Down syndrome, and she was taken to Southview at the time. Well, here we are 35 years later, and now she would be in the gen ed's classroom along with these other students that are in 80% of the time. So this is how this law has changed. Students have more of an avenue beyond high school with this law. Helps them out with the jobs program. They get to go to Mercy Hospital. I checked that program out. So people that finished high school, now they could go and do another jobs program. Lack of funding, not always have assistance with this program. And then it shifts IEP minutes to another student. That's another issue too. IDEA is our next law, passed in 1975. All children with a disability get a free and appropriate public education and in the least restrictive environment. Tenets of this law: identify children with a disability to get special education services. Students hope to have gainful employment someday, and provide education services for the student. This assists students between the ages of 3 and 21. I was shocked when I was reading some of this. And also had toddlers from 0 to age 2. This helps with funding for the law. In 1990, the name was changed to IDEA and originally called Education of Handicapped Children Act. The amendments to this law, 1997, 4, 06, and 11, it helps now students from ages 0 to 21. And I was at high school with students up to age 21 at times, and our goal is to have students working when they get out of high school, but sometimes it doesn't always happen, that students end up living at home. Voc Rehab will be our last law we'll talk about. It was initiated in 1984. Prepare students for career and technical education, and the tenets: it's high skill, high wage, high demand occupations after training. Interesting facts about this law: builds on success. These decisions are data driven for this law. Strengthen the disabled population. An example of this law: I used to take students to McAllister's when I was in high school, and it was getting them job ready, and some of these students were able to get employment there. Problem with this law though now is that we don't have enough teachers to fill all positions. So right now there's an opening at Barnes Hospital for a teacher, but there's many other needs in special school district that this position is probably going to go unfilled for a while. Some more interesting facts: funding is always hard to come by. Programs require accountability for the student. Used to collect data, which we talked about earlier, and help to align your job skills with the labor market. How does funding work for all these laws? It's most of it is all given by the federal government. They just call it different things. So the Perkins is given to the states through grants. 504 is federal government, gives it and helps out school budgets. Public laws, bulk of the funding is by the federal government. IDEA is by the federal funding for states. And Voc Rehab is federal funding to states as grants again. So you've got two categories that are based on grants, but this is based on population and per capita income. Comparing the laws, all assist students and adults with disabilities, the laws we looked at today. They prevent discrimination, accommodations, modifications, gives them opportunities, move up in the organizations, protect students and adults, and they get due process. Contrasting the laws, some of the laws are geared towards school and some are towards the workforce. So we found that. But the bottom line is it helps all students and adults out with disabilities. Funding differences for the laws, and then there's an age difference in categories for the laws. All right, so your exit slip for today, and I know you're tired because you're like, oh gosh, we just had to talk about law. But this is just a brief survey. If you ever want to dive into the laws more, you can. There's a lot of research on them. But what is the most important law that you can think of and why? So when you turn in your exit slip, you're free to go for the day. I want to thank you for attending today's presentation. I know have other things to do in the class. But my goal is for you to walk away with one piece of new nows. So hopefully you're able to do that. And then these are all my sources. And I thank you for coming today.